Have you ever felt an inner voice, soft but insistent, guiding you on which path to take? That voice you can't explain but feel strongly in your heart. What if I told you that this voice is God Himself speaking to you through your intuition? Today, I invite you to dive into an ancient story from the times of Canaan, where a man's destiny was sealed not by visible signs, but by that inner voice that changed his life forever. Pay attention, because today I will share with you a striking parable from ancient Hebrew books. In this story, there will be no coincidences. You are not here by chance, and I assure you that what you are about to hear has a special message for your soul. You may not know it yet, but the story you are about to discover has been destined for you since time immemorial. Pay attention to every detail, for God will speak directly to your heart through what you are about to hear. Our story begins in the vast and arid lands of Canaan, where a man named Zacharias lived, whose name in Hebrew means the one whom God remembers. Zacharias was an ordinary man, a shepherd, born in the humble village of Gibeon. From a young age, he had always felt an inner voice guiding him, although he didn't always understand it. His life had been marked by simple decisions, and although he didn't have great wealth, he lived in peace with his family, working day by day under the scorching sun of Canaan. But one day, that peace that Zacharias had known all his life was put to the test. One summer afternoon, while tending his sheep, he felt something strange. A deep uneasiness began to grow in his chest like a breeze blowing before a storm. It was as if an inner voice was whispering to him, but he couldn't understand the words. There were no visible signs, no warnings, just that feeling, an intuition telling him that something important was about to happen. Over the following days, the feeling did not go away. In fact, it grew stronger, and one night while he was asleep, he had a dream. In the dream, he found himself walking through an endless desert, with the wind blowing against him. Suddenly, he saw a figure approaching from the distance. At first, he couldn't make out who it was, but as the figure drew closer, Zacharias saw that it was an old man with a deep and wise gaze. The old man looked him in the eyes and said, "Listen to the voice within you, Zacharias. God is calling you. Do not ignore the signs He is placing in your heart." Zacharias awoke, startled. The dream had seemed so real that his heart was still pounding. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had just experienced. But what did that message mean? What was God trying to tell him? With doubts and fears in his mind, Zacharias decided to do something he had never done before. He went to the city temple and knelt in prayer, seeking answers. "Lord," he prayed fervently, "if it is true that you are speaking to me through my intuition, show me the way. Make your signs clear to me." Days passed without an answer. Zacharias felt more lost than ever, but something inside him told him not to give up. And then came the day when everything changed. A foreign merchant arrived in Gibeon with news of a great opportunity in the distant city of Hebron. The merchant spoke of fertile lands being sold at unusually low prices. Upon hearing the news, all the men of the town were skeptical. It was too good to be true. However, Zacharias felt a hunch, an intuition so strong that he could not ignore. Something told him he had to act, that this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Against the advice of his friends and family, Zacharias decided to follow that intuition. He sold part of his flock and embarked on the long journey to Hebron. Every step he took was a step of faith, a demonstration of trust in that inner voice, that although not always clear, had guided him up to that moment. When he arrived in Hebron, he found exactly what the merchant had described, a fertile and prosperous land at a price that no one could believe. Zacharias bought the land without hesitation, and in a short time, the small investment he made began to multiply. What seemed like madness to everyone else became a blessing for Zacharias. But the most important thing was not the material success he achieved, but the profound lesson he learned. God had spoken to him through his intuition, and by trusting in that voice, he found the purpose he had long sought. From that moment on, Zacharias lived with a new understanding. He knew that God did not always speak through great visible signs or thunderous miracles. Sometimes his voice was as soft as a whisper in the heart. But when we listen, when we follow that voice, we find the true path that God has prepared for us. The story of Zacharias is the story of many of us. Perhaps today, as you listen to this parable, you realize that you too have felt that inner voice. Maybe God has been speaking to you all this time through your intuition, but you have doubted, you have ignored that feeling. Today, I tell you not to do it anymore. God is calling you, placing signs in your life. It is no coincidence that you are here listening to this message. He wants you to trust that voice, to take that step of faith, and to see how his plan unfolds before you. Because intuition is nothing more than the Holy Spirit whispering to your soul, guiding you, protecting you, and leading you towards God's purposes. Trust in that voice, because when you do, the gates of heaven begin to open before you. This is the moment to listen, to obey, and to walk with the certainty that God is with you every step of the way. If you have come this far, I want to tell you that it has not been by chance. You may not believe it at this moment, but the story you have just heard about Zacharias carries a deeply significant message, one that can transform your life in ways you cannot yet imagine. Allow me to guide you in the next few minutes to show you how this story, although seemingly distant, holds surprising similarities to your own life. Pay attention, because if you are still here, it is because God has brought you to this point. Not everyone gets this far, but if you have, it is because there is something in this message that is meant just for you. Zacharias was no different from us. He lived his life quietly, doing what he knew how to do. But there came a time when he felt a voice within him, an intuition he could not ignore. Perhaps you too have found yourself in moments of uncertainty, in situations where there seem to be no clear signs, where the decisions you have to make are not easy. And like Zacharias, you may have also doubted that inner voice, wondering if it was really God speaking to you, or if it was just your imagination. But look at what happened to him when he decided to listen and act. He was not the wisest of men, nor the strongest, but he was humble enough to recognize that the inner voice came from God, and for that reason, his life changed completely. How many times have we missed those small signs that God sends us, thinking they are not important? The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verse 14, reminds us of something fundamental, because all who are led by the Spirit of God, these are children of God. Zacharias was guided by that inner voice, by that intuition, and that led him to an unexpected blessing. You too are a son or daughter of God, and if you allow yourself to listen to that voice whispering in the depths of your heart, you can be sure that he will guide you through the darkest and most difficult moments of your life. You may be facing difficult decisions right now. Perhaps, like Zacharias, you feel that the life you knew is about to change, but you cannot see where God is leading you. You find yourself in the midst of an emotional or spiritual desert, wondering what the next step is. And I tell you this with all conviction: if God has placed something in your heart, if you feel that intuition, do not ignore it. You may not understand everything he is doing, but he is preparing you for something greater. Like Zacharias, you may also face skepticism from those around you. Perhaps others do not understand what you are feeling or think you are making illogical decisions. But remember, God does not always reveal his plan to others, only to those he has called. Zacharias was ridiculed for selling part of his flock to buy land that no one believed was worthwhile, but he knew deep down that he had to trust that hunch because it came from God. And what intuition is God calling you to today? What is he asking you to do, even if others do not understand? Psalm 32 verse 8 says, "I will instruct you and teach you the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you." This is a firm promise for you today. God is not only calling you to trust in him, but he is also promising to guide you step by step along the right path. What you need is not to understand everything at this moment, but to be willing to follow his guidance, just as Zacharias did when he embarked on the uncertain journey to Hebron. If you find yourself in a stage of your life where you feel that the path is full of shadows, where the answers are not clear and the decisions are difficult, I want you to remember this truth. God has not abandoned you. Just as Zacharias walked through the desert without knowing exactly where he was going, you too can walk with the certainty that God is guiding you, even when you do not see the full picture. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 6, we read, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Zacharias did not rely on his own understanding, because if he had, he would have stayed in Gibeon full of doubts and fears. He decided to trust God completely, and for that trust he was abundantly blessed, and the same can be true for you. Perhaps God is asking you to trust him in a specific situation. Maybe there is something you feel in your heart, but you are afraid to act. I want to encourage you, like Zacharias, to listen to that inner voice. It is not your imagination. It is God speaking to you through your intuition. That intuition is his spirit guiding you towards his purpose, towards a future full of hope, even when the present seems uncertain. No matter how old you are, nor the experiences you have lived until now, God continues to speak to his people, and he continues to guide us, even when we feel we have seen it all or have gone through too many trials. Each stage of life brings new challenges, but also new opportunities to hear God in deeper and clearer ways. The story of Zacharias is a reminder that it is never too late to listen to the voice of God, to trust in his plan, and to walk in faith toward what he has prepared for us. So today, as you reflect on what you have just heard, I want you to take a moment to think about that intuition you have felt lately. Perhaps there has been something you have been ignoring, a decision you know you have to make, but you have postponed it out of fear or doubt. This is the moment to act, to trust in God and let his Spirit guide you. Because when you do that, when you fully trust in God and follow his direction, you discover that his plan is always better than anything we could have imagined. And although the path will not always be easy, you can be certain that God will never leave you alone in the midst of your decisions and difficulties. What you have just heard is not just an ancient story. It is an invitation to reflect on how God communicates with us, how he speaks to us through that voice that is sometimes so faint that we prefer to ignore it. That intuition, that feeling you feel deep in your heart is not a coincidence. Zacharias understood it when he decided to follow it, and in his obedience found the blessing. But today I wonder, are you willing to do the same? Are you willing to put aside doubts and trust that God is guiding you even when all you have is a hunch? Many times our life seems full of confusion, right? There comes a time when we feel that the road is full of curves and obstacles that we do not know how to overcome. Maybe you look back and see decisions that you would have liked to make differently, moments when you doubted what you felt and opted for the safe, the logical, only to find that this logical path led you to a place of dissatisfaction, of inner unrest. But let me remind you of something powerful today. God is not limited by our past decisions. He is a God of new beginnings, and no matter how many times you have ignored that voice before, there is always time to listen to it again. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 30 verse 21 offers us a promise that is as real today as it was in ancient times. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." God promises to guide us. He promises to speak to us, but we must be willing to listen. Sometimes that voice is clear and direct, but many times, as in the case of Zacharias, it is a whisper, an intuition that only those who are in tune with the Spirit can discern. You may think, "But I have made so many mistakes in my life." I have ignored that intuition so many times. How do I know if now I am really listening well? Let me tell you something important. God never tires of speaking to his children. No matter how many times you have failed, his love for you is so great that he keeps calling you, keeps giving you opportunities to take the right path. And if you are here listening to these words, it is because God is still speaking to your heart. It's interesting to think about how many times Jesus, during his ministry, spoke in parables. Each one of them had a purpose, a hidden lesson, intended only for those who had ears to hear. Today, this story of Zacharias can be your parable. The message may not be clear at first glance, but if you stop, if you open your heart and allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you through it, you will see how the pieces begin to fit together. Perhaps you find yourself in a moment of life where you no longer have the same energy as before, where responsibilities and burdens seem greater. The weight of the years, the decisions and the struggles you have faced may make you feel tired. But listen carefully, age does not diminish God's ability to use you, to guide you, to speak to you. God still has a perfect plan for you, regardless of how many years have passed. And many times, that plan is hidden in the things that seem most insignificant, in those moments of stillness where you feel a small spark, an intuition that tells you that something greater is coming. Remember the promise in Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Zacharias did not know the whole plan when he left his village and headed to Hebron, but he trusted that God had a greater purpose for him. That same promise is available for you today. God has plans for your well-being, plans of hope, even in those moments when everything seems dark or uncertain. I don't know what your exact situation is at this moment. Maybe you are facing an important decision, or perhaps you are in a stage of reflection, looking back and wondering if you have been on the right path. But what I do know is this: God is with you every step of the way, and he will never leave you without direction. Just as Zacharias trusted that small hunch that led him to an unexpected blessing, you too can trust that God is working, even when you cannot see it clearly. Sometimes life presents us with challenges that seem overwhelming. Losses, illnesses, broken relationships can make us feel as if we are walking in a desert without direction. But even in those moments, God offers us his peace and guidance, and his voice remains that beacon that guides us. You may not always hear God's voice audibly, but his Spirit manifests in that intuition, in those small impressions in your heart. Do not ignore them. Pay attention, because when God speaks, even in whispers, he is directing every detail of your life. Zacharias was not an extraordinary man in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. He was a man who was willing to listen, willing to act in faith, and that willingness is what made all the difference. God is not looking for you to be perfect, nor to have all the answers. He only asks you to trust him, to listen and follow his guidance. And I assure you that when you do, when you dare to take that step of faith, the blessings that God has for you will be much greater than you could have imagined. It is not an empty promise. It is a reality that many have experienced and that you can also live if you decide to listen and trust. Because when you align yourself with God's will, when you listen to that divine intuition, your life is transformed. At this point of reflection, it is important that you stop for a moment and consider the many ways God has spoken to you throughout your life. Perhaps He has done so through unexpected circumstances, decisions that seemed meaningless at the time, or that little voice inside you, that intuition you have not been able to ignore. Often we confuse God's voice with our own doubts, but when we truly begin to trust that He is guiding us, something profound changes in our hearts. Zacharias learned that it was not his strength, nor his intellect, nor his ability that led him to the blessing, but his willingness to listen to the voice of God, even when that voice was a faint whisper. And in your life, that same truth can make all the difference. How many times have we tried to solve things our way, thinking we have control, only to realize that the true path has always been to trust what God is telling us? In that intuition, that seems to go against what the world tells us. The world teaches us to rely on logic, on what we can see and understand with our physical eyes, but God operates in another dimension. His ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. When we listen to that intuition, we are tapping into divine wisdom, a wisdom that transcends what we can comprehend with our human minds. Have you stopped to think about how many times God has been speaking to you and you have not recognized it? Maybe it has been in those moments of greatest doubt or in the moments of greatest uncertainty. Maybe it was in the silence of a night when everything seemed lost, and yet something inside you told you not to give up, to keep going. That is the voice of God guiding you, showing you the way, just as He did with Zacharias. The intuition that Zacharias had was not something evident to the eyes of others. In fact, many ridiculed him for following what they considered an absurd hunch. And perhaps in your life, you have felt something similar. Decisions that you feel deeply in your heart, but that others do not understand. But I want to remind you of something powerful today. The voice of God is not always understood by the world. What seems like madness to others can be God's perfect will for your life. Remember the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. That is why following your intuition, when that intuition is aligned with God's guidance, will often be misunderstood by those who do not walk in the Spirit. Zacharias knew this. He knew that others could not see what God had shown him deep in his being, but he still decided to trust. Perhaps at this moment you find yourself at a crossroads in your life. Maybe you are facing an important decision or going through a situation that seems impossible to resolve. And inside you, you feel that small spark, that intuition telling you to follow a specific path, even though it does not make sense at first glance. It is in these moments when faith comes into action in a more powerful way, because faith is not just about believing when everything is clear. Faith is about believing when everything is uncertain, but you know that God is in control. Jesus Himself, in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 27, said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Do you realize the power of these words? He knows you. He knows exactly what you are going through, and He is guiding you every step of the way. His voice is not always loud or dramatic, but if you are in tune with His Spirit, you will be able to hear it clearly deep in your heart. And when you follow that voice, when you decide to trust in that intuition that God has planted in you, you experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. Sometimes the decisions we make following our intuition do not immediately lead us to a place of comfort. In fact, Zacharias found himself in a land full of uncertainties and challenges. But what sustained him was his trust that he had done the right thing by listening to God. And in the end, his obedience was rewarded in ways he could not have imagined. You too can be sure that when you follow the voice of God, He will take care of all the details. even when the path is difficult at first. Psalm 37 verse 5 tells us, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass." This verse is a powerful promise that you should remember every time you feel that intuition, every time God whispers to your heart. Commit your life, your decisions, and your uncertainties to him, and trust that he will do what is necessary to guide you toward his purpose. You will not always see the whole picture immediately, but you can be sure that God is orchestrating everything for your good. Perhaps, like Zacharias, you feel alone in your decision, misunderstood by those around you. But let me remind you that you are never truly alone when you follow God's will. He is with you every step of the way, holding you, guiding you, even when the road is difficult. And it is in those moments of greatest challenge that we experience the depth of God's love and faithfulness in ways we never imagined. Zacharias did not become a man of faith by having all the answers. He became a man of faith because he was willing to listen, to trust, and to act according to God's guidance, even when the world called him crazy. And today, you also have that opportunity. God is speaking to your heart at this very moment, guiding you, showing you the next step. Do not ignore that intuition. Do not disregard that soft voice that is calling you to follow a path that perhaps others do not see. Because in obedience to that voice, in the willingness to follow God's guidance, are found the greatest blessings and the deepest purposes that he has prepared for you. As you move forward in your life, remember that every step you take in faith, every decision you make, following the intuition that God has planted in your heart, is a step toward the fulfillment of his will for you. It may not always be easy. You may face challenges and doubts, but be assured that God is with you, guiding and supporting you every moment. Just as Zacharias, who trusted in God's voice and found his purpose, you too can find yours if you choose to listen and follow that divine intuition. You are not alone on this journey. God is by your side, and with him all things are possible. As you continue on your journey, remember that each moment is an opportunity to deepen your connection with God and to trust in his plan for you. Life's path is often filled with trials and uncertainties, but it is during these times that your faith is strengthened and your reliance on God's guidance becomes most crucial. The story of Zacharias is a reminder that God often speaks to us in subtle ways, through the whispers of our hearts and the quiet nudges of our intuition. These moments are divine invitations to align ourselves with his purpose and to step forward in faith, even when the road ahead is unclear. When you feel the weight of doubt or fear, recall Zacharias' journey and his willingness to trust in the unseen. Let his story inspire you to listen attentively to the inner voice that calls you toward a greater destiny. Embrace the changes and challenges with a heart open to learning and growth, knowing that each experience is shaping you into the person God intends you to be. As you face decisions, whether big or small, invite God into the process. Seek his wisdom and lean not on your own understanding, for in doing so, you allow his light to illuminate your path. Understand that the fulfillment of God's promises often requires patience and perseverance. Trust that his timing is perfect and that his plans are for your ultimate good, even when the journey seems long or the outcome uncertain. Have faith that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail for your benefit. Stand firm in the knowledge that you are never alone. God's presence is with you, offering strength and comfort. Let this story of faith and obedience encourage you to take bold steps toward your calling. Remember that your life has a unique purpose and that your journey is part of a larger tapestry woven by God's hand. Embrace your role in this divine narrative and be confident that as you walk in faith, you are contributing to the unfolding of his kingdom on earth. May you find peace in the assurance that God is always with you, guiding you toward a future filled with hope and promise. Keep your heart open to His voice and let His love lead you to the life He has envisioned for you. With God by your side, there is nothing you cannot face and no dream too big to achieve. Trust in His plan, follow His guidance, and watch as your life transforms in ways you could never have imagined.